This is for educational purposes only.
I am Taisha X Brown, your host. A warm welcome to our guests, James Charles, David Inno, and Jessica
Ladies and gentlemen.
Taisha X Brown. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of our weekly Q&A. Tonight, we'll dive into some deep, thought-provoking questions about democracy, politics, and their true impact on both our societies and wallets. With me are three incredible minds: James Charles, a renowned economist, David Inno, CEO of Fusion Globally Solutions, and Jessica Doe, a sharp journalist with NIM Newscast. Let's get into it. Question 1, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? Who is leading us to a brighter future, or is it simply a matter of values and perspectives? Taisha X Brown. The nation stands divided between two political forces, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, each symbolizing
Welcome to our weekly Q&A session. I am Taisha X Brown, your host. A warm welcome to our guests, James Charles, David Inno, Jessica Doe, Taisha X Brown. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of our weekly Q&A. Tonight, we'll dive into some deep, thought-provoking questions about democracy, politics, and their true impact on both our societies and wallets. With me are three incredible minds: James Charles, a renowned economist, David Inno, CEO of Fusion Globally Solutions, and Jessica Doe, a sharp journalist with NIM Newscast. Let's get into it. Question 1, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? Who is leading us to a brighter future, or is it simply a matter of values and perspectives? Before we dive into this week's Q&A session, I'd like to invite David Inno to open our discussion with some insights on the recent U.S. election. His talk, titled "The Vote Beyond Leadership, Gender and Color in the Harris vs. Trump Election," promises to take us beyond the headlines and dig into the underlying currents that shape this election cycle. Mr. Inno, take it away. David Inno, thank you. It's time to see and understand what's really at play here. Time to open your eyes and think outside the box. This election wasn't just about leadership or policy. It was an intersection of identity, gender, and color. As we unpack the forces behind the vote, let's examine not only what each candidate represented, but also what it says about where we are as a society. This moment challenges us to question how we're shaping our future and what identities are driving our choices. So, let's dive deep and explore what's truly at stake. In recent political history, the election featuring Kamala Harris and Donald Trump proved to be more than just a contest of policies, leadership, and vision. It became a referendum on identity, on gender, race, and the shifting cultural tides of America. Kamala Harris, as the first woman of color on a major party's presidential ticket, embodied a multidimensional narrative that spoke directly to many voters' identities and values. For some, her candidacy signified progress, a necessary breaking of barriers in a political landscape dominated by men. There were voters who cast their ballots not solely based on her stance on issues, but in support of a milestone for American women, particularly women of color. They saw in Harris a representation of what could be a vision of an inclusive, diversified power structure where leadership reflects the population's diversity. For others, Harris's racial and gender identity raised questions about experience and suitability. While some saw her as embodying the future of an inclusive America, others viewed these identities as political tools. The duality of Harris's heritage as a Black and South Asian woman added a complex dimension to how she was perceived, celebrated, and critiqued. It became clear that identity politics had deeply intertwined with democratic processes, elevating values around representation to the forefront of the campaign. On the other hand, Donald Trump's base often saw his policies as aligned with traditional values and a direct approach to American leadership. His supporters weren't as concerned with breaking racial or gender boundaries, but valued his unapologetic style and promised to uphold certain ideological norms. Trump's supporters, in many cases, were driven by a desire for stability, tradition, and a familiar face in a rapidly evolving political and cultural world. As Americans cast their votes, it was evident that the lines weren't merely drawn by policies on immigration, healthcare, or economy. This election, more than any in recent history, underscored the power of identity in shaping political choice. The stakes of this contest illustrated the dynamic and often polarizing interplay between race, gender, and political allegiance in America. In the end, the election became a reflection of where the nation stands and where it hopes to go. It illuminated deep cultural divides and the growing demand for representation that resonates with all parts of society. For those who voted for Kamala Harris because she represented their America, or for those who voted for Donald Trump because he symbolized their ideals. This election revealed how much of our vote is driven by the people we identify with, not just the policies they propose. James, let's start with you. From an economic perspective, who do you believe would better navigate the future of America and the world? James Charles. Well, Taisha, it's not just about picking a person, it's about the ideology they represent. Trump advocates for economic nationalism, focusing on America's interests and reducing international dependencies. While his policies led to tax cuts and deregulation, which benefited corporations and investors in the short term, they also raised issues about long-term sustainability. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, represents a more inclusive vision, advocating for climate change action, infrastructure investments, and a stronger social safety net. Her approach, while potentially more costly in the short run, could lead to more stable, inclusive growth over time. So, it's not a clear-cut choice. It depends on whether you prioritize immediate economic growth or long-term systemic change. David Inno. I agree with James, but I'd also add that as a business leader, the global landscape plays a massive role. Trump's isolationist policies like America First can create instability in international markets, which could be a challenge for global businesses. Harris's approach, focusing on cooperation and multilateral diplomacy, may provide a more stable environment for business and international trade, albeit with some regulatory burdens. The key question for us as citizens is which leader will provide the most strategic environment to innovate, grow, and protect economic freedoms. Jessica Dole. Let's not forget the media's role in this. Both Trump and Harris have been portrayed in vastly different lights. While Trump has been criticized for his divisiveness, Harris has often been hailed for her ability to unify. However, the real question is not just about leadership, but about how these leaders are packaged and sold to the public. Media plays a huge role in shaping public perception, and that impacts democracy itself. Question 2. Does democracy really exist, or is it just another word used by the powerful to control us? Taisha X Brown. This is a tough question. Democracy promises power to the people, but how much power do we truly have? David, what's your take on this? Are we really in control, or are we just playing a part in a larger game? David Inno. In theory, democracy means power to the people. But in practice, there are so many forces at play that dilute this ideal. Corporate lobbies, money in politics, and even systemic inequalities often limit the influence of the average citizen. It's not to say democracy doesn't work, it's just that it's been warped in some ways. The elite often hold more sway than we think, and policies are shaped behind closed doors long before they reach the public. This is where transparency and accountability come in. James Charles. I believe democracy is a fluid concept. It's far from perfect. And while the power may seem concentrated in a few hands, it doesn't negate the need for public engagement. Yes, corporations and lobbies hold immense power, but the fact that people still vote, protest, and influence policy decisions is proof that democracy in some form still functions. The real question is whether or not we, as a collective society, are aware of the influence we do or don't have. Jessica Dole. The power of democracy has definitely been diluted, but not lost. However, the way it's manipulated by those in power, the media, corporations, political elites, raises the question, are we truly being heard, or are we merely being pacified? Democracy isn't just about voting every 4 years, it's about ongoing civic engagement, and that's what people must reclaim. Question 3, is politics just a theater stage? Are politicians simply playing roles for public approval? Taisha X Brown. We've all seen the performances, debates, speeches, and media appearances. But how much of politics is really about substance and how much of it is pure theater? Jessica, you've been in the media for years. What do you think, Jessica Dole? Politics is absolutely a stage. Leaders are often more concerned with crafting the perfect narrative than they are with real solutions. The media amplifies this performance, turning every debate or statement into a spectacle, often at the expense of policy discussions. Look at how elections are framed more about personality than principles. This creates a disconnection between the public and the policies that affect their lives. James Charles, politics has always had an element of performance. But behind that performance are real decisions that impact the economy and our lives. While it may seem like a show, the substance is still there. The key is learning to separate the performance from the policy. If we allow ourselves to only focus on the image, we risk losing sight of the substance. David Inno. Theater or not, the outcomes of political decisions affect our businesses, economies, and daily lives. We may be watching a show, but the policies that come out of it are very real. For businesses, it's about understanding the bigger picture behind the performances. Whether it's trade wars or fiscal policy, these decisions are real, though they may be wrapped up in a very public performance. Question 4. What are the impacts on the global economy and your business? How does political decision-making trickle down to our pockets? Taisha X Brown. We've seen how political shifts, especially in major economies, can send ripples throughout the world. James, let's look at trade wars. How do political decisions affect the global economy and, more importantly, the average person's wallet? James Charles, take the recent U.S.-China trade war. Tariffs on Chinese goods raise costs for U.S. businesses, which in turn raise prices for consumers. Whether you're a small business owner or an individual consumer, you felt that in your pocket. Political decisions like these don't just affect national economies, they affect what you pay for goods and services, your access to products, and even your job security. David Inno. From a business perspective, politics directly impacts our operations. Look at the recent U.S. Federal Reserve decisions to raise interest rates. For businesses that rely on credit, the cost of borrowing went up, which impacted investments. For individuals, it meant higher mortgage rates. Economic policies may seem abstract, but they have a tangible effect on business costs and consumer behavior. Jessica Dole. At the end of the day, political decisions are driving market fluctuations, inflation rates, and trade agreements that impact our daily lives. Whether it's healthcare, interest rates, or taxes, these decisions shape the economic environment and our purchasing power. And let's not forget the growing impact of global instability, whether in Europe, Asia, or the US. Those ripples hit our wallets too. Taisha X Brown. This has been an enlightening conversation with our incredible guests. As we've seen, politics, economics, and democracy aren't just theoretical constructs, they're real forces that shape our lives and our futures. To keep the discussion going, I encourage everyone to dive deeper into these topics through further reading, analysis, and critical thought. Stay engaged, stay informed, and always ask the hard questions. Thank you for joining us tonight.